and the family thought that they projected Sol Plaatje as a comrade, saying he looked like a militant comrade. And the ANC people in Northern Cape were very adamant that, yes, he's a nationalist, he's a comrade, so he must be projected as a comrade, a leader of the people. But the point is, that salute was not there in the 1920s. The fabrication of history. So instead of having him as in a Black Power salute, the family insisted that he must be drawn, or the statue must be made of him sitting down on a desk writing, because he was an intellectual. So the nationalists, the comrades, said, no, he can't be an intellectual, because it makes him looks as if he doesn't care about the people. He's a cold intellectual. He must be seen standing in front of because, he's a leader of the people. But then they missed one thing, is that because, you see, culture is very important, and they're yearning for legitimacy. Because Black people believe that if you have to invoke someone's spirit, those who are close to him must be there to communicate with him, because he's now part of the spiritual world. So because they had this statue of Sol Plaatje, talking about Sol Plaatje, they could not go ahead without the presence of the family, because the family had to communicate with him, because we believe that they're still alive, even though they might not be with us. So the family said, if you go on with that statue, you will be cursed. They then decided, hey, Mcebisi Ndletyana. We cannot go on without the family. So they decided that they will remove the statue that they had of a nationalist Plaatje. They took him away, sent him somewhere, and they decided to bring the intellectuals Plaatje, who's there now in Kimberley, a very beautiful statue. So here you have a contestation between the state and the family. And this contestation is very important, because had Plaatje remained simply a private person, we would not be celebrating him as an icon. Plaatje became what he is in the public domain. His public self was created in the public domain. So he's part of the public. But the family claims him as theirs. He's a father. He's an ancestor. So there's contestation, different claims, contesting claims between the domain of the private and cultural and the public. And this clash hasn't been resolved yet, and it will continue to dog us for a while. Another one had to do with Shaka, which also had to be changed just recently. The king took offense at the fact that Shaka's statue was erected next to a cow. He said, no, it doesn't look like a king, he looks like a shepherd. And the sculptor thought that he was displaying Shaka's wealth, right? And the king said, he's even too short. See, he's Shaka, you see, Shaka Zulu. So he must be huge, right? He must be huge and be muscled up, beefed up. And yet, none of them have a picture of Shaka. None of them have a picture of Shaka. But they have this image of Shaka as a great Shaka. So he must be massive. So we create these images in our mind. So they protested when they were told that they don't have a picture of Shaka. They brought a drawing of someone who's supposed to be Shaka. So the sculptor looked at this drawing. This person's arms are not even equal. It's some drawing. But on the basis of that, the king of Zulus in KZN insisted that that statue must be struck down, and he will tell them what Shaka looked like. And now they're at it again, spending more money, building an imaginary Shaka, spending a lot of money on it. My last point, perhaps, has to do with what Sobs was saying. What does it mean to be an African man in the 21st century? I'm surprised by that question. because it supposes that an African man, identity of an African man is frozen, is static, is stagnant, it doesn't move with time. It borrows from old anthropological conception of what it is to be an African. When they come here to look at African men, they go to the villages because that's where they think the real African man is, naked, living in kraals and huts. It's typical of the Western depiction of Africa. When the New York Times has a story about Africa, all they show is a barefoot woman, dirty looking, in a kraal somewhere. Because to them, that's what Africa represents. So Africa is represented as a stagnant, frozen past. It doesn't move, it doesn't evolve with time. It's defined outside of modernity, outside of progress. African man is part of progress, is part of modernity. Those who spearheaded the nationalist liberation movement were modern men, were men of letters, were men who brought together the African and the modern world. These were hybrids who brought the two worlds together and brought humanity to South Africa when the missionaries who purported to be human were part of the colonial project, at least some of them. When the colonizers who claimed to bring progress, who were civilized, were chopping off kings' heads as souvenirs, and yet claiming to be civilized and closer to God than we were. These nationalists brought together the two worlds, spoke of non-racialism, spoke of equality, and insisted that they too were made in the image of God. These are the people who envisaged a non-racial franchise, a new South Africa. They envisaged the 21st century. They are part of the 21st century. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm a bit nervous to show my white face up here, but I'll be the token whitey tonight. And by the way, Mcebisi, my surname was butchered as well by the authorities in this country. And I'm one person who has always thought that the Voortrekker Monument looks like a giant pop-up toaster, except I don't know how you're going to make it go away, even little bit by little bit. Sobs, would you like to respond? Or would you like to take questions from the floor? Okay. Can we have some hands up, please? Okay, I'm going to start up there. Okay, can you give that gentleman, has that one? Okay, 1 and 2 over there. Okay, let's ask those questions. That gentleman.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Mawande from the Daily Dispatch. Prasobs, I heard what you're saying, and thank you very much for sharing that with us. But I'm worried I didn't hear you touch on songs. Songs were very key in, for instance, how people mobilized back in the days. This is a point I also raised with my friends who wrote the book on Marikana. Let us kill each other today. Songs, as Black people, we mobilize through songs. We sing to mobilize, to come together. But I don't know whether in the book there is a chapter where you touch on the importance of songs as part of our heritage. Can you please elaborate on that part? Thank you very much.
Can you just tell us what your name is, please?
My name is Sulu Ndolose from Walter Sulu University. My question is directed to Prof. Ndletyana. My question is on the issue of Home of Legends, because I see you've written a couple of articles on that. My question is, What's your take on that? Because for me, I've written a research on that. It seems to me that there isn't anything happening on that. We have legend from this province, but then there's nothing happening. The likes of Griffith Mclenge are from this province, but then in terms of tourism, there isn't anything that's happening to lobby and attract people as compared to Cape Town. Because, for instance, you go to Polsmo, Polsmo attracts tourists from abroad because of Mandela. I don't know how to say, but what's your take on that? Thank you.
Thank you. Another question in this section? Anybody? Okay. There's one. Can you just run across to the back? Oh, there you are. Thank you. And then there's one down here. 1, 2. Okay. We'll come back to you. All right. There you are.
Thank you. My name is Pila Mtwana. I'm from Fort Hare. First of all, I must thank you for the the debate that you have given us this evening. My point is, I think the boundaries of heritage have come to haunt us. And this is why today we've got people still asking the African in the 21st century. It seems as if we've been so, we've taken a side of being liberals in a situation that does not need us to be liberals. You've mentioned Sol Plaatje and others who were in the early 20s, and those people were nationalists. Now, our nationalism seems to have changed, shifted quite a great deal, and now we're not even liberals, we're money makers, and now we're creating now a havoc, if not to say creating a siege to the middle class. In short, I want to say that I think what is needed in South Africa at the moment is to create, have the middle class and the nationalists creating a situation where we'll have a one identity of South African that will embrace all races. At the moment, we're not doing that. We try maybe to do that in the 60s, and it shifted haphazardly in the 80s and in the 90s, and hence now we're in this situation. And it is only if we can revive the Black consciousness ideologies, the Pan-Africanist ideology. Of course, I don't want to say the PAC of Sobukwe, but I'd rather say the Pan-Africanist ideologies, and not to shun or distance white people from this situation, because we need to talk about South Africa, part of our program, so that we lead or be part of global world. Thank you.
Thank you. And
Thank
that
you.
gentleman over there.
Thank you. I think I must stand up.
Identify yourself.
My name is Smilo Rodboom, a heritage practitioner. I'll make 1-2 comments and end up with a question. First of all, congratulations on the book, and I must confess, I have not read the book yet, but I'll have one today. You see, heritage in this country has never been on the center stage as it is now, and mainly through of efforts of people like you. Thank you very much for that. Because before that, before the Heritage Council, heritage was really on the sideline, but is now a topical issue. And I want to thank you for that. I cannot agree with you more in saying key decision makers are actually not caring about heritage. But I'm surprised today you did not mention that in this country we have got examples of provinces who have taken heritage much more seriously. In other platforms, you have mentioned that yourself. Mpumalanga, KZN have done that before. And I think it's high time that provinces like the Eastern Cape must follow that example. Identity and memory. I think it is very crucial memorialize heritage. We look at the context. Just like Dr. Mcebisi has just said now, you would know, Sobs, when we constructed the memorial in Duncan Village in East London, And after there was an outcry, your organization initiated the hearings. There were hearings in the people of Duncan Village told us in those hearings that we have created a shaka down there. And we were aiming to memorialize the 1985 massacre. And the people of Duncan Village said, we didn't carry those kind of weapons in 1985. We carried stones. So the context is very important in memorialization of heritage. Those were my comments. My question, what do you take of the combination of tourism and heritage preservation? Can the two go together? And if yes, in what way to get the most benefit? Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. We'll answer these questions. Would you like to, you can answer it from there, or do you want to come up?
Yeah, there's a saying that blessed are those who are tall, for they shall see the kingdom of God. So when you lift your mic up, you're much more strategically positioned. Let me start with you, Bungani. The comment that you have made, tourism and heritage. If you read the white paper as a heritage practitioner, you will see that the white paper did mention this, where it is suggesting a code of good practice, or code of ethics when it comes to utilization of heritage resources for tourism. And I think I remember that line. When it comes to, I think I've made a comment that there are countries that rely on their cultural industries with no primary products in terms of their own economy. If you look at France, for instance, the way it is doing, Italy, if you look at the heritage sites that they have, look at UNESCO website, that in South Africa, we created an Africa World Heritage Fund. Today, out of the world property list, Africa accounts for less than 10%. That is, out of the world the heritage property list of what, about 1,600 sites and so on. But in Africa, we still have about, I think, just above 100. That on its own is a challenge. Now for Eastern Cape, heritage is a jewel of this province, or it is supposed to be. And if policymakers, were to make, I've made this point in a number of gatherings. You have mentioned Mpumalanga, for instance. Mpumalanga enlisted a site, in fact, they didn't enlist it as such, it's sitting on the tentative list, because of the work that we did. Because Premier Mancotywa said, I'm troubled by this province because there's this, it has a potential of heritage. Mpumalanga means where the sun rises. And yet that potential is not realized. He said, put together with the Research Council, I wanted to put together a research to look at the history of this province 2 million years back. There emerged about 10 sites on a number of fields, anthropological sites, geological sites. There's a site at the moment that is sitting on the tentative listing of UNESCO from Mpumalanga. It is called Makonja Mountain. And Makonja Mountain, if it is enlisted, it preserves or depicts evidence of early earth formation. It therefore means that Mpumalanga contributed in the early earth formation. So if Gauteng, positions itself as the cradle of humankind, Mpumalanga is there now saying that we are the cradle of early earth formation. Now, Peter de Villiers raises in that book, leading professor in that book, from Wits, he says that no other province can pride itself on the history of liberation, heritage, or no province can pride itself on the role that it has played so far as liberation heritage is concerned, except for Eastern Cape. 100 years of the wars of dispossession were fought here. But if you look at how KwaZulu-Natal has done, Bambatha Rebellion came late in 1906. And if you look at, for instance, the only Sandlwana, because Bambatha Rebellion, but there is investment there. Now we have yet to recognize that value. I think for policymakers in the Eastern Cape, I think we've got to look at Bungane, your own conversation models. What do you preserve and how to preserve? For instance, Mount Cook, where the first Bible was translated. It's an important, a milestone for this province. Just between East London, Uyocho, Echeni, and up to PE, there are sites there. So if this Home of Legends were to be linked to that, this is our contribution as the Research Council, to say that it doesn't help just to have a list of names in the billboard. Because people start to say, Upubana, Simbunbana, Bagakubana, Ukubana, Ukona, and so on and so on. Then it's an opportunity to reposition the province, but it's an opportunity to rewrite history, for the younger generation. But it's also an opportunity, because you're also saying that the manner in which also it is done, because if you don't also look at, for instance, epochs in the Home of Legends, instead of looking at names, but look at epochs. One national epoch that is important is the Wars of Dispossession. You will see, for instance, that between 1799 and 1903, this is where Chief Davis Thurman, the Class Brothers, actually, the Khoisan, and the whole cooperation between Namaqumukwebe, led by Chief Chungwa, and as well as Khoisan. That led, of course, to another war, which is the war that was led by, and the whole cooperation between Namaxhosa and Namaqumukwebe, up to the 5th Frontier War, which was at the Battle of Grahamstown, which again led to the incarceration of Unxele, and then the famous escape of Unxele in 1821, together with Chief Davis Thurman. And at the moment, the Research Council is involved in the repatriation of Chief Davis Thurman 240 years later. And this is the very important history. That history actually lies beneath in this province. And it is this province that where you actually need that. I mean, we're involved in Makanda. We've seen today that there's a complaint about where Makanda should be buried and whether these were rightful claimants or descendants. Again, it also centers around Bungane, the decolonization of heritage, which is very much important. Well, some of the family members would say, some of the people would say true oral history, and indeed was buried in that area, was Hichawe. Those are questions that were raised. Some people are also raising, is it not coming from Willow Vale, Ukajani? And I was not there, but the issue then is that how do you preserve that memory? Something that is very much important. And then rewriting of that history. I think Professor Julia has shed some light in that regard. There's one old man who has just passed, who left us. Unfortunately, I couldn't attend his funeral, Chabu, who helped us for even the book by Julia. That old man is called Paul. Kutatu Paul knows that history. And one day, when I was reading that book, I said, Tatu Paul, who paid you actually? Were you paid when this book was written? He said, because he actually in that book and to share the story of Mzambe and as well as the Battle of Amalinda and Impazo Katutula. Tutula was a beautiful lady when Undlambe wanted to take early from his uncle, Undlambe. And that is how that war actually broke up. And they fought. It weakened Amaxhosa at that time, going now to the Battle of Grahamstown. You remember that book that Nsikana dismissed Ngqele as a myth. And the history on is so interesting when you start reading it. And I'm saying that Eastern Cape, that's the heritage of Eastern Cape. I'm just talking now about the wars of dispossession as an important era. I've not touched the early modern liberation struggle. I haven't touched all of those, epochs, the Black consciousness, and the early modern liberation struggle, the role of the youth, the role of women, and the number of these important icons. You may find that these frontier wars are not even 9 wars, actually. It's not by the way routers, it's what we have. We have not talked about the Battle of Stokwe, Amambondo Mise, which is my client, actually. And up to the last reigning king, Umhlonto, in 1870. And as well as Amambondo, which is, Eastern Cape is so rich. So the question that I'm raising, Pungane, it goes back to you, it goes back to the policymakers in this province, that its heritage or liberation heritage is a jewel, is a diamond of this province. It's not something that you need to look at. Peter Delias raises that issue where he says that no other province, like he says, like Eastern Cape, can claim not only authority, but to be on the. So again, Home of Legends, Mcebisi is going to deal with that, but I'm saying get away from the tent approach and get to the policy, long-term, research, so that you have a credible, agenda that will place. There's the issue of Mandela memorials now, which out of 10 sites that come from the Mandela, from the liberation route of Madiba are in this province. There's Kono, there's Umvezo, there's Mqhekezweni, Clarkbury, Hilltown, Fort Hare, which is the prime site. So the team of experts led by, of the World Heritage Committee in South Africa visited these sites. But so that's, you have touched me, Ronev, in me, and I hope that this can be, perhaps is going to be taken, going to change. Investment on sites, Pungane. Our sites are actually abstract spaces. The grave of Palo. If you take a kid to some of these sites, because our kids are tweeting, they will tell you that my dad just took me to something. I don't know, it's an old man that died here and I don't know what's happening. Because there is no real investments on the sites. Like you said, credit of humankind. How do you turn these sites from abstract spaces into strategic development nodes in the Eastern Cape? That one is important. I'm leaving that. I'm not going to touch on the songs. I deal with songs in this book, actually. Songs are very much important. Again, there's some that I've also raised. Again, for Eastern Cape, that if Eastern Cape were to have an academy of music, that would be good investment for this province. This is a home of jazz, Queenstown, a maker of jazz, a gateway of jazz. And that's very much important. You can't talk about heritage, you can't talk about the songs. So you know that our people are very creative, even in church. When there's a discord or a challenge, you see people singing, and they can sing a song now to demonstrate how they feel. Yonagele Mailungi, and then you can see that at that time, there's something that needs to be fixed. Without you knowing what is happening, it's in a church. Once they say, Yonagele Mailungi, then there's something wrong that must be fixed. And our people are actually articulating that in a song. So songs play a very, very important role. That's why actually we also forget also Mcebisi, that some of our own icons were musicians themselves. I mean, Oliver Tambo, OR was a chorister. That's why there's that melting pot festival that took place in Ekurhuleni. He was also a chorister. And how do you ensure that you also invest? We talk about freedom songs also here. But in the preservation of memory and how do you look at freedom songs? Yeah, very much important. Must we dilute freedom songs? Must we change certain freedom songs because you think that they offend certain national groups, or they offend reconciliation in South Africa? The Dumuni Bulu was one of those, and we look at the Dumuni Bulu here as well on that. I'm raising a question there that says that if you change those songs now, it means that they were not, there's something that was not, well about, they were not psychologically, balanced, and why they did this thing, because they would say they are bloodthirsty, these people. That's why we are saying that, change, kiss the poor now instead of kill the poor. And I'm saying in that article, when you're preserving, you don't preserve things because you like them. You preserve because they were like that, again at that time. All what you must do is to give them a narrative. Why this thing was saying like this, instead of changing it. And then so on. I may be wrong, but I'm saying, I'm raising that in that book, is that why we've got to remix these songs to give them a much more softer, a meaning. And is it something that we ought to do? Actually, when just lastly on this issue of the songs, you will remember that, in fact, they were raising that as well there's a case that was decided in Joburg, in the north of Johannesburg, of one of these record companies connecting a song with Noma Themba and Tula Baba. And that the Research Council decided actually to participate in that. In fact, we're weighing whether we should not join as friends of the court in that particular matter, because this was about traditional songs. The issue of ownership of traditional songs then came to the fore. Who owns the traditional songs? As you know, that some of these songs, in as much as they were, it's our people who sang them, but they are now privately owned. And how do you ensure that you're able to? I'm raising that issue there, that is it not right time that we encourage the legal profession, that we must have black people who are specializing on entertainment industry, or to help the musicians. Musicians are signing contracts every day. I was so surprised myself that Miriam Makeba is not owning some of the songs that we thought that she was owning. You can name Solomon, the Solomon Linda Imbube owns it, and it does not own it, and Brenda Fassi, because they enter into contracts without real understanding the implications of those particular contracts. Like, for instance, the song Tula Baba, we know that song actually was used when Umame Tulusumdana at the back, to Tula Baba, and then so that the child must sleep. So that child has a traditional element in it. But so that song is a traditional element in it, but that song is now owned by a company. And that company is owning the song itself. So those are the areas that surely we need to also to look at. I'm sorry that I've taken long on this. That the issue of the class, I'm leaving it on Mcebisi, but when I spoke about that issue, of the 21st century, I think it must also be understood that a book is about raising the debate around on the discourse on particular issues. And that is why I'm from Effort. I think Mcebisi also touches on this. I'm raising this issue because it's coming, day in and day out on the issues of what is it that we must preserve? What is that we must not preserve in the 21st century? But also some of our practices, what do they mean? And so on. So those are the areas that I think we need to look at. Thanks so much.
I think tall people like standing so that they can accentuate their height, and short people prefer, well, not to demonstrate how short they are. So I'll sit if you don't mind. 2 points from me. One has to do with Home of Legends, and it links to a point that I attempted to make but didn't quite get around to making it, which has to do with the way in which we celebrate national days. What is happening here in relation to Home of Legends? I think the concept is good, as Sobs was saying earlier. But you see, the concept was all wrong. In that, certain things at times are too delicate to be left in the hands of politicians. Because politicians at times can't help themselves. They use things to affirm themselves. They can't see beyond themselves. They can't tower above the fray. So the Home of Legends really started off, well, it hasn't gone too far. Perhaps the accusation is a bit unfair. But it's a hegemonic project party in terms of a partisan history. And the icons that are selected are icons that affirm the hegemony of the ruling party. So, and when it does that, it excludes. When it excludes, it alienates certain individuals. This is what has happened to our national days. We don't celebrate National Day. We don't celebrate in a way that builds toward creating a national identity. But we celebrate a victory of the ANC and its iconography. And that iconography is a partisan iconography, because it then reduces national identity to politics, as if our struggle was conducted purely within the political domain. But in fact, it was not. It was done in sports, in churches, in literature, taken by a whole lot of people, women, white people, coloreds, Indians. And these are part of what constitute a progressive, universal, non-racial movement that the anti-apartheid struggle was. So because the national days, therefore, have been organized to tell us how great the national liberation movement was, certain people feel alienated. They don't go to these events. It's not a homegrown, from the bottom up celebration, but it's an imposed concept of who we must think we are, of who we ought to be. So the legends, the province of legends concept, as I wrote in that piece in the Daily Dispatch a while ago, suffers from that a little bit. And this explains why national days have not been a success. And of course, I go back to the issue of white denialism. I think white people are comfortable not being part of these celebrations because they don't consider themselves part of the new nation, partly because of prejudice and partly because we have not opened up sufficiently enough to welcome them. It's again, the major issue is that we haven't had an honest discussion about our brutal past. That's the first point. The second point has to do with the different ways in which the cousins are recalling their history. By cousins, I mean the Xhosas and Zulus. This is a very interesting question which continues to linger in my mind. I don't have an answer to it. I have a working hypothesis which explains why Zulu speakers have been so enthusiastic recalling and celebrating their history, and yet we've been somewhat indifferent, if not tentative. Celebrate their culture and are enthusiastic and active in celebrating and collecting it when they think that identity was under threat. The colonial scholarship built a lot of that Zulu identity around the personality of Shaka. And when the Zulu monarch was destroyed in the 1860s, 70s, for quite some time, there was no central figure, a strong monarch that had been part of a unifying Zulu mythology. And Zulu intellectuals attempted to do that when they formed Inkatha Yesizwe, Inkatha Nkululeko Yesizwe in the 1920s, to regain that Zulu unifying identity. And for quite some time, there's been a sense that the Zulu identity has not lived up to its past, to its great past. And on the other hand, and this explains, let me finish the thought. This explains why, if you give KZN anything that has to do with their history and identity, they do it immediately. Nakasa, for instance, Net Nakasa is back here, died in 1960, I think, or 50s. Whether or not we agree with the way he was buried is something else altogether, because he was buried as a Zulu. When in fact, Net Nakasa did not consider himself a Zulu. He was an intellectual. He didn't even like speaking Zulu, identify himself as a Zulu. So he was tribalized in death, the same way you tribalized Mandela in death. A universal figure, an international figure, who was an icon of civil authority. Idinile Sizwe. I had written about this, that it should be buried at Freedom Park. It becomes a shrine for our democracy. It becomes part of civil religion. You bury him, you're making him a Tembu prince. So he too was tribalized the way that Nakasa was. But why has the Eastern Cape not been as enthusiastic as KZN? My sense is that there is a sense of cultural confidence that has been part of the Xhosa personality for a while. Two things, perhaps. One is the hybrid identity. The leaders, the political leaders, were universal hybrid folks who were somewhat assimilated into the English culture. So they don't see the dominance of English culture as a threat to ethnic culture, because they subscribe to that culture anyway. They are products of missionary civilization, so they are part of it. They own it. They would say, Madiba, right? So that is why then there's such rush to rename English names of our towns, because we identify with them. But at the same time, we've also have African names of all these towns. So we know Komani, sorry, King Ikonge, Monty, all of them have their own African names. So for me, in trying to understand the different ways in which the cousins have recalled the past has to do with their place in that history. The one's identity is threatened because it developed and was somewhat emasculated or trampled upon by a colonial authority. Whereas the other, the southern cousin, the Xhosas, have been part of forming that identity, and in fact have formed alternative ways of that cultural identity. So that's a hypothesis. Whether or not it is wrong or right, I don't know, but that's an idea. Thank you.
Okay, well, you've now clapped everybody left, right, and center. This is why we like him. I'm going to take some more questions. Okay, there's a gentleman in a very stylish hat in the middle there. Okay. And then there's a gentleman in a red shirt. Okay. And, oh my word, there are a lot. Okay. The really good thing about this dialogue is that Sonwabile wanted to hear the opinions of the people. So I'm going to ask them to keep their responses a bit shorter. And if you can just make your points quite brief, I'm going to try and take, okay, hold on. We just go to the gentleman in the red hat, start with him, and I can see about 5 people. So number 1 with the red hat, with the white hat, and number 2 with the red shirt, and number 3, this man here in front of you. Okay, with his hand up. Okay, let's start, and we'll come back to you now.
Yeah.
Umfowabo kaNcube uzikhali zomkhonto mazilakathungwa Mangcotshwa sawubona Doc kunjani Doc, I've got something that I need to quote on, then I'll come up with a statement that I need to put forward to the audience. It says, my mother said I must always be intolerant and of ignorance, but understanding of illiteracy. That some people unable to go to school were more educated and more intelligent than college professors. It comes from Umaya Angelo. My point is, with the heritage issues that we've got, among why is it that we're doing this? Let's sort this thing out. What Angun is, we are separating each other as if we're not coming from the same family. Who are we? Heritage Society, let's actually sort this thing out. Who is Nguni? Let's talk African. Let's be Africans and say, who are we as Ngunis? I'm an author, I write books. I talk what I like, I write what I like. Who are we as Ngunis? That's my point, first and foremost. And I'll say too, again, common sense is not common to all the people. What is that we're doing to ourselves as Africans?
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Program Director. My name is Mfulam Timkul. My question is directed to Kune. My colonial heritage says I must stand up when I speak English. That's what I was taught. That's why I'm like, can I have just 2 questions for me? One relates to the issue that you've raised. You spoke about history, culture, and culture and heritage. Now, my challenge with our experience here is that I think all of us we know, or some of us were aware, that it is possible that culture may not be able to achieve what is intended. We come from a past, at times would teach us about something called Xhosa culture or whatever culture. But that culture had been used to suppress and oppress our own people. Homelands were built around these cultural issues and some form of heritage. Now, what then says to me is that one worry that I have is that not every time that culture could be progressive and revolutionary. It could be used as it could be very retrogressive, that's the right thing, and reactionary. Now, that I would assume would go for heritage as well. Now, how do you then, in your book, propose to deal with those kind of issues in terms of, say, much as we're talking about pride in terms of our culture, but then how do we make sure, I don't know if you're addressing it in the book, but such that we don't find ourselves in situations where the same heritage and culture is used in the same manner that it had been before to make sure that culture is progressive, is assisting our society? That's the first question. The second question relates to specifically now heritage. We tend to speak, I don't know if this is what you mean, but I think when we speak about heritage, we're also speaking about nation, which maybe could take us into issues of boundaries. I don't know how, perhaps yourself in the book or somewhere else as heritage activist and so on, how then do you deal? Because I would imagine if we're speaking about heritage in South Africa.
Can you wrap up?
Yeah, I'm just about to.
Thanks.
Yeah, you're speaking about heritage in South Africa. You're speaking about heritage that goes international. Part of South African heritage, for instance, is somewhere in Africa and international. How then do we then link, I don't know if it's addressed in your book, to link the international character of heritage such that it's able to make sense here in the country? Thank you.
Thank you. That gentleman over there, and there you are. Can just one question, please, and just make it short.
I will try.
Thank you. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Qinebe. No problem. My name is Sakele Skenjana. I'm a business coach and an entrepreneur, born and bred here in this province. I launched an initiative a few months ago that we call Entrepreneurship and Leadership Conversations, which is basically a platform for engagement, networking, inspiration, and it seeks to create a new generation of entrepreneurs and leaders that will actually take this country forward. And in your book, Qinebe, I'd like to know if you have addressed the issue of African leadership, African entrepreneurship models that have sustained our people pre-colonialization, and which in fact have been deliberately and completely eroded by the colonialization itself. Because the economic setup that we operate in still benefits the colonizers. The policies actually close our people and our entrepreneurs outside the mainstream economy of our country. And the second question would be, how do you...
That was just one.
How do we plan, or how do you plan to engage the policymakers and sensitize them about heritage as being a strategic resource for nation building?
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, this lady in the front. And then I'm going to take two more, and then we're going to wrap up. Okay, do you mind standing? Then we can see you all, or you can sit if you want to, if you're also a short person.
Thank you very much. I'm Pumla Madiba.
Sorry to speak.
I am Pumla Madiba. I associate myself with many of the things that have been said by both speakers. And I agree that there's a lot of policies that have been formulated over the 20 years since the dawn of democracy. However, there's something that I think we are missing, that although we acknowledge the fact
won't you just speak into the mic? I don't know.
We
if people
acknowledge the fact that heritage, or I would rather qualify it and say cultural heritage, not just heritage broadly, because it's quite complex. Cultural heritage and culture belongs to the people. Do you think the policies that we formulate every day from the top, formulate them in languages or in a language that the people who are the custodians or owners of the culture or cultural heritage talk to those people? Or is it meant to run with the people who are at the top, leaving the people whose heritage would like to conserve? What can be done to improve? Maybe we'll make a better impact if we were to look at languages of the people whose heritage it is that we intend to develop and conserve.
Thank you. Gugu, are there any tweets? Not. Okay, the gentleman who's flashing his phone at me.
Thank you a lot. My name is Mtunzi Ngonyama. I just want to make a comment before my questions. I've noticed you mentioned issues of service delivery and issues of identity, and that the government is much more focused on issues of service delivery as opposed to issues of identity. I think I agree with you with that, but I think you should go further to explain to us what is heritage, because heritage might mean a lot of things to other people. You know, to me, heritage might mean protection of customer laws, you know, and such as promoting young girls not to practice on sex activities before age, and such issues. Like for example, in rural areas, you're not supposed to have a site or inliwa if you are not married, whether you're a man or a woman. But that, according to Bill of Rights, Chapter 2 of the Constitution, everybody is all equal, and such makes it difficult for traditional leaders to practice such. And also the issue of perhaps a customer law promotion versus a common law application in courts, how they rule issues on that. I so wish we can touch on such issues, but much more on how you define heritage, so that we can begin to you know, sometimes we sort of classify it in many ways and lose a contest. So thanks.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to take one last one, and I'm going to take this gentleman. Is there anybody who just has to ask a question? Okay, the lady with the white hair. Just Denise speaking.
Sorry.
And tell us what your name is,
I'm
please.
a Fielding. I want to thank you for your input. It's been most thought-provoking. But if we are absolutely serious about wanting to build a nation with the bottom line, Ubuntu, we've got to raise the bar. We can't be selective about our memory. My grandchildren are the sick in this province, and I have no feeling of shame about anything, because I know the heritage of my people. I know the heritage, I'm talking to my own family people. I know the heritage of many of the clans of the Xhosa with whom they mingled, mixed, and knew. I have had ancestors and people previously who were students of Lovedale. There are many, many things I could tell you. And I don't think that any part of any of this nation's heritage, any part of us, should be suppressed in any way, or that just the bad, and there is lots that is bad, should be promulgated. We should tell all of it. We should even tell the story of the Khagabi, buffalo hunter, who pretended to be in Nhlambi because he knew the consequence of what would happen to him if the Khoi or the San, I don't know what they're called now, Bushmen, what was the name was previously. Things change so fast you can't keep up with it. What would have happened to him had they twigged on to that? That's another story, just a little story. And there are many stories of the ordinary people, not the great people, not the people whose names are on the headlines all over the show, the ordinary, everyday people in this nation. And I love this nation, and I love this province, and I don't like anybody within it to be made to feel that they're not part of it, because we are. regardless of where we come from, because we're living in today, we're living now, and all we need is the Ubuntu, which the Xhosa have taught us so much about. Thank you.
Okay, the gentleman behind the little girl with the South African flag.
She's an African.
Good evening.
Just short.
Yeah, my name is Zahir Rahman. I'm from Walter Sisulu University. I just want to thank the speakers for the very informative evening. And the first quick question is just, tell me the statue that we got. You were speaking about statues. The statue that we got there in East London, in front of the wall there, is that real? I mean, a depiction of Steve Biko? Because from the pictures that I see, it doesn't really look like Steve Biko. So I just like to, you to inform me. And then I just want to say is that, we're talking of heritage. Heritage, I think it's related to our culture, and also it's related to history. And as the one gentleman said, that is it a matter of preserving certain things and not preserving certain things. I think we need to preserve everything. So, for example, if we got the statue of, I'm just taking that while I'm on Biko, that we should have even, say, like this lady said, everybody's heritage should be respected. We should have the people that actually tortured him, have a picture of those people there. Because, not the statue, but a picture just to show our children, because of this heritage that we want to promulgate. It should be something where our children must learn. Our children don't know how we had to go whites the side, non-whites the side. They don't know on the separate benches, the separate beaches. All this is part of our heritage, the apartheid heritage that we lived. And there must be, the whole idea is that those children, our children, must learn from the heritage, that the suffering that people went through, that where we were and where we want to go. As the one speaker said, we must progress. And so we must progress from where we were down to somewhere more, as he says, modern, but something more greater where we can be above. But it must be for our children. Our children need to learn what our heritage is about.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you. And that's the last, the gentleman down in the front.
Good evening. My name is Lunga Mahola. I stay here in East London, originally from Stutterham. In the things that Mr. Mancotywa and Mr. Ndletyana has touched on heritage, I want to know, because as I'm here in East London, for instance, I got a concern, serious concern, that national days, as they have mentioned, politicians tendency of grabbing national days because it's government that is funding these days. Now, I want to know is there a possibility of a heritage council, maybe to talk to government, that politicians, even the code there, that no political t-shirts should be allowed in those stadia, because these t-shirts are turning, in fact, they are seeking to dominate these places, whereas it's government money, not from political organization. Now, these tendencies are dividing our communities, and I know Mr. Mancotywa, his role from Sun in the cold water and electricity, regardless of their political beliefs. Now, he's the right person for this Heritage Council, because heritage, it's about everybody. He mentioned that everybody has got heritage in himself. Now, I want to know if in future, maybe next year, he will talk to politicians that they leave national days to people of those municipalities. If it's Nelson Mandela municipality, the people of PE must decide what they want as their heritage. Black, white, colored, every person staying there. Politicians aside. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, we're gonna close up. I will hand over to the two gentlemen to make their concluding remarks and answer any of those questions they would like to.
Okay, thanks so much. I think this evening is great. I even have an amended CV now of being a former Sanko activist, you know, which is good anyway, you know. But although I was never part of Sango, you know, I was part of Sansco, you know. Yes, which was formerly Azaso.
Sorry.
Which is the South African National Student Congress, and as well as Azaso then before. But anyway, it's a decorated CV actually. I'm glad to get that. They're about to correct that.
Sorry, it was a white thing.
No, yeah. I think the only thing that I've got to do, I'm going to be very short. On the national days, I think the community ownership of the national days, there's got to be asserted. Communities, I think, should be owning the national days themselves. The media is also notorious in this, because when they if there's any activity, they will ask whether there's a minister who's going to be there or not. We can't go to Cholomunga as the media if there's no minister who will be addressing. And it's also that I've seen that actually happening, you know, and there are many activities that are like that. So in this book, I'm also raising this issue of the community ownership. Even the themes that we have on Heritage Day, the process of coming up with those themes is quite bureaucratic. It takes a submission from a DDG of Arts and Culture, maybe to the minister, and then it goes to cabinet. It then becomes a theme. What about the civil society? Who has participated in that? It also links to the question that Sis Pumla raised. Sis Pumla is a renowned heritage expert. She has raised that issue could link to that. Our policies have been top down and not bottom up. If you look at, for instance, now there's white paper. The white paper of Arts and Culture was reviewed in 2005 by Professor Sekhai. And the DG of Arts and Culture at that time was Aitumile Musala. Later on, it was again reviewed by the current DG. And there was no connection between the review of 2005 and the review of 2012. But in all of this, there's absence of communities. I've addressed this as Pumla in the book, where I'm talking about the role of communities. When are you going to stop this dishing out of culture from the bakery to the people? And yet it belongs to the people. Because heritage or cultural heritage is in the correct hands when it is in the hands of ordinary South Africans. So even the policy review at the moment that is before the Minister of Arts and Culture, we have raised that issue. That at what point are we going to really communicate and consult with people on the ground, consult with practitioners, consult with the people that are involved in culture, consult with the people. And the Heritage Council once came up with a transformation charter 2 years back, Heritage Transformation Charter. I've never seen our people participating in that way. I mean, you would think that in those halls, the issue was about bread and butter issues. You would think that people discussing houses, they're discussing water, sanitation, and yet they were discussing Ubuntu. How to restore values of Ubuntu. People are troubled by these issues. The rights of children. Our right-centered society at the moment. You know, when you and I grew up, you had rights and obligations. But our children today, they have rights only. There's no balance between obligations and rights because of that right-centered society. I was once asked a question on the 24th of September about why our idioms are so linked to cattle. Like, for instance, our people will say that inkomo buthongo ayikho. And that inkomo buthongo actually led us for a number of years as a student in livelihood. When I spent only 2 hours sleeping, I usually remember my father when he said this, I couldn't go to you don't get a car if you're sleeping. You go, that's actually, that's what it means. And therefore saying that, like what Pumla is saying and yourself, we've got to go to really, go back to that. And in that transformation charter, people were crying. I mean, I remember in Cape Town, Khoisan, they would say, let's adjourn to go and cry and come back. Because they think that this government is not taking culture seriously, because matters of identity are very, very sensitive by nature. So we have got to, there's a way, in this book, I'm actually raising that. I think I've already dealt with what Pumla has raised on the issue of top-down approach. It's so interesting also, Pumla, how government is going to deal with the current policy review of culture. That is the white paper that we are reviewing at the moment. It's so interesting as to how, because we have raised that issue again. Sometimes we take models that adopted, that we take from other countries without looking them, whether indeed, I mean, UNESCO studies and so forth. The issue of whether this is Steve Biko or not in front of the town hall, in the front of that city hall or town hall, I think the same thing. I think people have raised that. People say that that person in a military gear or military posture cannot be Steve Biko. It's what? Yes. 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 Again, it boils back, my friend from Walter Sisulu, that we have not, consulted enough. We've got to rethink, not just consultation. I know that it takes a consultant, an architect, who just crafts a monument or something like that and present it to council, and it passes. You can say, but how are we going to, is this thing depicting really? And then what are the dangers? What are the costs of having this monument or posture? I mean, in Dungan Village, we came up with that. We even found that in Dungan Village, there's a mother who, my child's name has been misspelled here. But two, my child was 6 months and he was killed by tear gas. And there's nothing actually even explaining that, why how my child died. And the counselor there stood up and said, no, this person died of diarrhea. And then we had that person crying, and we had to call ambulances and so on because this was so sensitive. The counselor didn't know the massacre of 1985, that this child was killed either naturally, but he actually died there. So those are the things that we're talking about. But another area, my friend, is how do we construct these monuments? It's also very much important. The Owar Tambo monument that we're going to see in the Daily Dispatch and the media, whole media, I got interviewed today about Oliver Tambo in his birthday, defaced band actually. That is the two runnables. And how do you deal with that? And also, is it not high time that when you put these monuments next to it, you put a school or a clinic, so that it must actually impact to the livelihood of communities? Because if you have got abstract faces that are there, and how do you protect that? You have also raised a very important issue, two issues. By the way, that was my president in Mtata Youth Congress. You have raised a very important issue. Two things we to comment on, because I know you know the answers yourself. On the negatives of culture. The negatives of culture, anything that is expressed without looking at these negatives can be dangerous. But I should think that the whole issue of the negatives of culture, I'm addressing in the book, where I'm talking about, for instance, that woman who was wearing a miniskirt and chased by taxis because they taxi drivers, because they were saying they actually it was against African culture. I'm raising that, and that's cultural prejudice. That's what I'm raising, and I'm therefore saying that it's true. I agree with you that if it's not well guarded and directed, it can actually get out of hands, and that's why the issues of narration. I've raised the issue of Ukutwala. There's one king actually who asked me a question. I'm not going to name. He asked me a question. One king from Tata actually. He says to me, this thing of women called Ugoshwama, paraded and in front of men, and is this African culture? And I said, but what do you think? He says, no, as far as I know, this is not African culture. And during the time of slavery, this is actually what happened because they actually abused young girls. And you have now taken it as part of, and it was raising that issue. And when I came back to the Research Council, I narrated this. And somebody said, there's an element of truth of what you are saying. The issue of narration, the issue of research, but oral history, so that anything that is practiced, it must also be looked at and be tested and to say, but is this really how it was practiced? I know Minister Jordan used to say, I can't listen to these young men because they don't know what they're saying. There's nothing called African culture. And so on, so on. He used to say those things. Anyway, he used to say he's a Republican. So he doesn't ascribe to African culture or tradition. What is this thing? And then all those things. And then lastly, okay, the issue of international norms, we also follow that because there's no time. You and me will discuss that. Lastly, let's go to Mtaka's Kenjan. I know that you are coming up with a very good concept of leadership in the Eastern Cape. I was talking to Professor Sonwabile Mancotywa, who actually addressed your one of your sessions. It's actually something very interesting. And I would love to encourage you in that. One of the things that I think I'd want to advise you follow this wealth enlistment process that the Research Council is involved in. That is the liberation route enlistment as a research site taking Mandela Legacy in South Africa. We've already submitted at some tentative sites in that regard. I'm interested in Degas Kenjana to say that even in our own business management will be so informed by, for instance, the story of Mandela. What is the vision in business? For instance, if you look at the vision of Mandela, when Mandela said, I'm prepared to die, how many people are prepared to die 30 years later? And that's a vision statement, because the vision, you must live it. I mean, the young man Solomon Mahlang was prepared to die, and yet he never saw Mandela. The people in Lesotho were prepared to die because Mandela, he inspired the people when he said he was prepared to die. To me, that's one of the greatest vision statements. Now, as like Chinese have done, when Chinese went to the World Heritage Committee to inscribe the Silk Route, they made a statement of significance in the world. Why don't we make a statement of significance in the world around leadership using Mandela Legacy in South Africa? To say that if there's any build, for instance, something in Kuno, I know that you're talking about why Mandela Matiba is lying there, but he is there now anyway. Build something there with the Eastern Cape provincial government, and taking a lead in that. This is what next week we're actually briefing the cabinet around that. That statement, so that if, let's say, there are negotiations somewhere in countries that are torn apart by the wars, that negotiation comes to Kunu, that negotiating team, because you are using that to define, it's a statement of significance in the world. So this is very, very much important, the concept of leadership, that you can actually use heritage to build, to harness, a leadership. And I know that you have promised also to invite us in one of your sessions in Degas Kenjana. And I think you can, following this Mandela legacy and as well as the enlistment process, of the Liberation Route as a World Heritage Site at the moment, and which were followed. I mean, the main examples, Kosnati Biko has done very well to also build, and then we contributed to establish that center in Ginsberg. And it's also coming up with very good, lectures in that regard. And I'll leave other areas to Ukaba here. And I think I would love also myself to thank you for Dispatch for really this nourishment on this book, and the not just audience but participants. I come also from a school of thought which says that heritage is very important for society, for prosperity. It's really something that we ought to harness. I also think that next year, when you hold these public hearings in the Regional Council about monuments, about how do we memorize our past and the present, the past talking to the present. And by the way, the lady who spoke about, I cannot finish that commending you for being so bold. You are an African. Go to the definition of African by President Thabo Mbeki. He is actually capturing that very well. That indeed you are an African. Then you claim your being from this country, and you are indeed an African. And thanks so much. And I will say that to all the people who have gathered here, and Dawn, I know that most of the articles in this book actually were written for Daily Dispatch, and others actually were written for the Star, the City Press. But it has not been easy to get some of my work on some of the papers. But Daily Dispatch actually, because when you write for a paper, the intellectual property actually gets transferred to them from you. And then the Daily Dispatch did not hesitate to release those papers and articles. And thanks so much also to really, I really, please pass it as well, that you have contributed a lot. But the book itself, we were saying that we also would love to go to other places. I mean, in Waters Sisulu, my friend that side, they want the book. That is the Mtata, and we're making arrangements also to have another discussion that side, because Eastern Cape is too big. But go and read the book. Other things here. I've not mentioned place names. I've not mentioned how do you honor our heroes. I've not mentioned unsung heroes and heroines. There's a lot that I've not spoken about. Outcry over slaughter, is prejudice, masked as pretty. That's and all of those very interesting topic. But once you start reading the book out, actually finishing it. I promise you that. Thanks so much.
Just one thought. Restaurants are closing. You're also hungry, and the soccer playing. Just one thought. The statue Biko shows a distinction between authority and power. That statue shows Biko in a military pose, because it's based on the notion that leadership is acquired through military prowess. But in fact, Biko was nothing military or masculine. He was persuasive. He ascended to leadership through persuasion. And through persuasion, you then earn leadership. It's authority that people consent to you. So you might have power, but not have authority, because you are not persuasive and you lack the legitimacy. So there's a distinction between power and authority. What we are facing now is the alienation between power and authority. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both. Very interesting topic, and thank you for coming. And please buy the book.